Is it go? Hi, everyone. Happy Pride, and welcome to our discussion on resisting the anti-gender movements in the Eastern Partnership countries, brought to you by Stockholm Pride, obviously, and by RFSL, the Swedish Federation for LGBTQI Rights, represented by me, Natia Gvenishvili, in cooperation with the Eastern European Coalition for LGBT plus Equality, which will be represented by 3 activists from the member organizations of the coalition from Ukraine, Armenia, and Georgia. And I would actually like to ask them to present themselves very quickly. Let's start from Ukraine. Olena, please tell us shortly about yourself.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. So my name is Olena Shevchenko, and I represent Ukrainian LGBTQI and feminist organization Insight. So I will tell today about the situation with anti-gender movement in Ukraine and the recent developments in this field.
Thank you. Let's pass to Armenia. Mamikon, are you with us?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for this great opportunity. I'm Mamikon from Armenia, working for an organization called Pink Armenia, and we're like the biggest LGBT organization, and also dealing with these anti-gender movements that later I will share some experience with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamikon. And last but not least, Georgia.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm Natia. I represent Women's Initiative Supporting Group. This is the feminist organization, 20 years old already, that started in 2000, and we work on LGBT women. We do advocacy, we do community empowerment and public awareness. I will also speak about our experience on ultra-right and dealing and resisting ways and methods. Thanks.
Thank you, dear colleagues. And before I get back to you with more questions and give you the opportunity to go a bit in depth on the topic, I would like to make a short intro about why we're talking about this issue today. We've been hearing more and more about the anti-gender movements affecting the life and work of LGBTQI movements and people around the globe. Most recently, we've been hearing about the so-called LGBT-free zones in Poland. We've been hearing about how Hungary is now limiting trans people's access to legal gender recognition. And, every year this time, we hear about, gruesome attacks by different types of anti-gender groups on the peaceful assemblies, prides, and demonstrations arranged by the LGBTQ movement. And in relation to this, we see that this is a well-organized and it's not a sporadic phenomenon, right? It's a well-organized movement with global ties, and RFSL, together with the Eastern European Coalition for LGBT Equality, we decided to actually look a bit more into it and see what's been happening in the region. We prepared a mapping of those movements in the Eastern Partnership countries in Russia. We finished it last year. And I would like to give you some context and then get back to you with the question. So to start, what do we mean by anti-gender movements? We use this term as an umbrella to define groups that may have different stance in the society, from party political to more grassroots, but that are united in their opposition against issues related to gender and sexuality, like LGBTQI people's rights, women's reproductive health and rights, and often also share anti-migrant and other xenophobic sentiments. And these groups, as I said, are diverse. I mean, we have politicians and clergy, which mostly work hand in hand in our region, because the divisions between state and organized religion are quite weak, despite the fact that formally, it's divided. And they also feed off of each other and drive conservative reforms together, as we see in many, many countries. Then we have the layer of the so-called ultra-conservative society, civil society, which can be non-governmental organizations. They can be registered as NGOs, as media outlets, as foundations, and they say that they concern themselves with the demographic issues in the country, children's rights, as well as, protection of the so-called traditional family, when in fact we see that they work together to drive very well-organized campaigns against women's reproductive health and rights, against LGBTQ people. And last but not least, we also have more violent, more militant far-right groups that the difference here is that they are more anti-establishment, so to speak. They can be more anti-government, and they actively work on recruiting youth, for instance. And they may not always get along with different, even conservative politicians, and they may not always be connected to the religious institutions, but the fact that LGBTQI people, as well as people of different ethnicities and races, and access to free, reproduction services, does not fit their image of the nation that they're fighting for, so to speak. They are very easily united with the other two groups, broadly speaking. What I also wanted to add, before I get back to you, is that we see the anti-gender movements as a puzzle or as a mosaic, where the pieces that I already spoke about are represented in different proportions and in different combinations in different countries. And here we also need to say that many people think that because the Eastern Partnership countries and Russia share the common past in being, members of the former Soviet Union, that the situation is fairly similar. There are similarities, of course, but in the last 3 decades, our countries developed in quite different directions in many aspects. So the presence of the anti-gender movements and different groups that constitute these movements also highly depend on the political, economic, cultural, and social circumstances of each country. So here I would like to stop with the overview and actually give direct the question. And actually, what I forgot to do is remind the public that we will dedicate last 10 minutes of the event to answering your questions, so please write us. I would like to start by asking a question to you, Natia, about the situation with the anti-gender movements in Georgia, because here in Sweden, Georgia made the headlines last November when there was this far-right protest against the premiere of And Then We Danced, a film that became very popular in Sweden. And it was often portrayed as this, people's protest against this movie, when actually it was a protest organized by one or two far-right groups that also now have political ambitions. So tell us a bit more about what's the context and what are the political aspirations of these groups. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for your question. This is our third meeting already in this frame, but as we are now in the face of broader audience, I will give a bit broader background. I completely agree that although, of course, we know the society is homophobic and there are homophobic anti-gender attitudes in the society, but I completely agree that this specific anti-gender leaders and movements that are well organized, and we see that they are getting more well-connected and well-networked, not only in Georgia, but in our region and globally, are kind of instrumentalizing and capitalizing on the fears or stereotypes that is in the society. But of course, such a big mobilization is only possible by getting fundings that they receive from, whether from Russia or maybe just outside. What happened in November, it was really quintessential or paradigmatic moment, but actually anti-gender movement and anti-gender discourse in Georgia, and which makes, I would say, Georgia a quite peculiar case, started, and now I will go a bit back, started in the 90s when there was not even public appearance of LGBT groups, which really makes Georgia's case interesting. It was around 90s when we we can already observe politicians and media using anti-gender language and criminalizing or pathologizing the identity, LGBT identities. So in the 90s, there was already this discourse of LGBT identities are something that is brought from the West, which is also funny because if we go a bit also back in the US in the 50s, there was completely reversed discourse when the McCarthy's time, there was a discourse that the USSR was threatening the way of American people's life with communism and homosexuality. And this is really ironic and interesting that how this narrative kind of reversed, and after what was happening during the war is now again this West Russian kind of collision, and of course Georgian politicians were influenced a lot by Russian discourse. So already in the beginning of 2000, we've seen that there was some anti-gender pride marches when there was no planning of public appearance by LGBT movements. We started, as I mentioned, we started in 2000, but it wasn't until after 2010 when LGBT movement appeared in public. And now, of course, we are striving to get the or occupy the public places. But as I said, what happened before is that already anti-gender movement occupied these public spaces. So it was already very difficult for LGBT movement to go into scene in these circumstances when political homophobia was, sorry, here's some. Do you hear me well?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it was already a very difficult situation when LGBT movement started going out in the public spaces. And political homophobia has a big history, and we've seen the political parties using political homophobia against their rivalries, so-called. As you mentioned in the beginning, in Georgia, and what we call anti-gender movement, anti-LGBT movement, it's really a mosaic. We see them as a non-official civil movement or even political parties now, because one of the movement that was called Georgian Power, which was organizing anti-immigrant, anti-feminist, anti-LGBT marches, they now announced that they will, they formed the political party. So now, as we have this year in October, elections, have changes in the legislation and constitution, there is a real threat or possibility that ultra-right groups might even enter the parliament, which is something we should really be very careful about. Yeah. Another really big challenge for LGBT movement, for feminist movement, for any movement that is progressive is the fact that actually there is no really a good alternative for this ultra-right, because we see that we see the rise of ultra-right, but what should be the alternative is the left, and there is no really a left progressive political parties or like strong social movements, and if there are attempts, it's very much segregated. So it becomes even more difficult to somehow take LGBT issues or feminist issues on the political level, because we see recently that if there is any fight between the anti-LGBT parties and other parties, it's really conservative and neoliberal parties, and they just fight for the same to just get the power. And even those parties who pose as a pro-Western or capitalize on Western values, we've seen already as a previous government or during this government that they are not really pro-Western, and it's really just instrumentalization of this topic. So this is also really a big challenge for queer movements, and I think we are now trying to somehow coordinate between these challenges.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Natia. And we will have time to shortly discuss also the resistance strategies and what you feel should be done. But I would like to move on to Ukraine, actually, because in Ukraine as well, I mean, as we found in the states in the region that are sort of less totalitarian or less authoritarian in their political structure, we have seen like a bigger variety of the pieces of the anti-gender puzzle. And Ukraine has been making headlines with the far-right groups and attacks of the far-right groups. And Olena Shevchenko, who is here with us today, also have been on the receiving end of some of the threats and violence as well. But what we also saw in Ukraine is this very fast increase and consolidation of the conservative powers in the parliament. So, Olena, would you please tell us a bit more about the context on the ground and how the actions of these far-right groups and anti-gender groups have finally translated into the political situation in Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. I will try to be brief, but of course this is such a complex and important topic now for Ukraine. As you already mentioned, Ukraine is a champion among those countries which is trying to get off Russia's influence with traditional values concept. But the first thing, let's say, you already mentioned, like structurally, we can look on the far right and anti-gender movement as a triad. So the church, and then also pro-family organizations, which is trying to engage more and more society into such conservative, values like traditional family values and protection of family. Of course, from LGBTQI people, from whom, and then also these ultra radicals who is doing the dirty work, They are trying to fight with LGBTQI and also with women on the streets, trying to push us home, like not to show us on the public spheres. So basically, this is very in line in what they are doing now politically. On the level of Parliament of Ukraine. So they are trying to somehow limit us in our freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. So that's why in recent weeks they registered already 2 draft laws. One of those is on so-called prohibition of the propaganda of homosexualism and transgenderism. You see, this is, not the first attempt for them also to mention somehow trans issues. Why? This is very connected to this gender ideology, how they call it. So basically the main battle for us now in Ukraine is around not equality for LGBT directly. It's around the Istanbul Convention. Istanbul Convention, which prohibits domestic violence. So what we are doing now, in terms of our intersectional work, feminist and LGBT, we are trying to push for ratification of the Istanbul Convention because it gives the protection to women who are suffering now during the lockdown. Everybody knows it. But what they are doing, they are trying to switch our focus and attention, saying like, in Ukraine, we don't have a problem with domestic violence. We need to invest in the traditional family values, because traditional family values saying we have this protection because man, he's a strong one and he is not going to beat any women. We know this bullshit, from any other countries, especially from the Poland, because Ukraine is almost similar, going to the Poland scenario, which we heard already, trying to, cancel the Istanbul Convention. So basically what they are doing, they are trying to put all their efforts to limit all mentioning the gender in the laws. They're trying to do everything to say that we are talking not about gender equality, but about the equality between men and women, which is of course not acceptable for us. and especially about the Article 4, which is exists in Istanbul Convention, saying that it's also about sexual orientation and gender identity. So what they are trying to do, they also registered several draft laws to protect the traditional family from this gender ideology. That's why I'm saying about that threat, that this is general, similar threat in different countries around the world. And we need to invest our efforts to push the attention to the gender equality instead of equality between men and women and everything like that, because this is the main fight for us now, and we need to unite our efforts because we don't have those influence. You saw what happened in Poland. In Ukraine, we have almost the same situation. In different regions of Ukraine, we already have this decision of the local government about the free from LGBT zones. So basically, what we are moving towards, we already have in the parliament the Union of the Deputies, who is saying their name is Dignity, Values and Family. And this is the main lobbies against Istanbul Convention. So what we are doing now, we are getting ready to the local elections, which took place in November. And afterwards, it will be voting for Istanbul Convention. This will be the main fight for us.
Thank you very much, Olena. A lot resonates really with Poland, but also like with what's happening globally, especially with the anti-gender movements really rallying against the term gender and gender equality. It seems like they understood that gender is something much broader earlier than the emancipatory movements did. This is a bad joke maybe, but I think that we will touch upon the need for intersectional work and more solidarity between the emancipatory movements a little later. I would like to summarize quickly. In Georgia and Ukraine, we see actually how, the grassroots work, so to speak, of numerous groups and movements within the anti-gender movements are again starting to translate more actively into politics. Not that the politics in Ukraine and Georgia have ever been particularly not conservative, but now we see this drastic increase. In Armenia, the situation is slightly different, and Mamikon, thank you very much for patience. But Armenia is a very separate case because we see that with the revolution and with the government, a new government arriving to the country, which has a better understanding of human rights and is maybe a bit more proactive in a positive sense, we also see that the anti-gender movement started to mobilize with like a new force and new power, maybe because they lost, the access to political power that they used to have before, or maybe not. Tell us more about what's happening and what the context is there, and how it affects your work.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, you are right. We have a little bit different situation, but in many ways, anti-gender movements are repeating the same strategy, the same structure as it happens in many other countries, because they have the same agenda coming from certain point. And anti-gender movements, what we witnessed, started in 2013, when Armenian government, that time conservative party, adopted gender equality law. So it was not their political will. It was mostly the international lobby and some recommendations that they adopted to have this kind of policy and law on gender equality. But then the anti-gender groups, which I think it's not a big surprise, they started their manifestation and statements in Russian, though in Armenia we have our own language and alphabet and everything. So they started putting pressure on this gender equality law, saying that gender is all about pedophilia, perversion, putting homosexuality next to it, and trying to raise the level of fear in society, because majority of the society, they don't know what is gender. We don't learn this term in schools, and it was really easy to manipulate the society and give another definition, a wrong definition to that word. And then the government decided to change the law slightly, mostly the wording, and called it equality between men and women. And as Olena says, I agree that this should be about gender equality. It's not only about between men and women, and it is about gender. So after 2018, when we had revolution and the politics changed a lot in Armenia, which was really good, not only for generally politics, but also for civil society, for LGBT people. Of course, they didn't come up with the best solutions for human rights protection, but at least we saw that they have understanding what is human rights and why there should be equality, why everybody needs to be protected. But anti-gender groups, they started their work in a different way, attacking the government and not allowing them to do their work. Again, civil society organizations like us, feminist organizations who are very active and visible, they continued to be their target of attack. They didn't attack us. So previously they were attacking us on Facebook, in online platforms, but now they started also to have some physical attacks. When women's organization was having a presentation of a book about sexual abuse, against minors, they said that this book is spreading pedophilia, though it was against pedophilia. And they attacked women's organizations with X, and everybody who participated in that presentation was shocked. So this group also started active campaigns against Istanbul Convention, against Lanzarote conventions. Those two conventions, we know Istanbul Convention is focusing on violence against women, highlighting domestic violence issues, and Lanzarote Convention is about children's right protection from sexual abuse. But the way they manipulated society, they say that those conventions are for LGBT people. They are spreading pedophilia. And the society, they don't read such conventions. They get in panic and they start signing all kind of petitions. They say they have 100,000 signatures against this convention. And now they are also spreading fear using the name of George Soros, saying that all these organizations that are against Armenian or traditional values, they are supported by George Soros, the same movement that happened in Hungary or Russia. And they are calling us the witnesses of Soros, which is another discriminative term in this sense. And having this label, we all are being targeted not only by anti-gender movements, but by the whole society, because they don't understand what's going on. They just read the manipulative media. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mamikon. To summarize, all of you touched upon some of the tactics that are used by these groups, and you will be surprised to find that some of those tactics are the same that we usually use in the human rights community. So basically driving or opposing certain reforms. Obviously, we drive the emancipatory reforms and oppose the reforms that are limiting to our rights. They do the opposite. They use strategic litigation sometimes. They use petitions. So this emphasis on democracy and, people's will and people's opinion is something that they employ a lot. And obviously on issues of, gender and sexuality, where we don't really have access to proper information most of the time, it's easy to manipulate people into, agreeing with some of those very arguable opinions. So the question is, what do we do? What tactics can we use to overcome this tendency? Or how can we stand united against these trends to both, continue to drive the positive change, but also stop the rollback and backlash that we fear is happening right now? Maybe, Olena, if we can start with you.
Yeah, very good question about our tactics and strategies. What we did during the petition on the Istanbul Convention. So our aim basically was to collect 25,000 of signatures. And it was for the small organization like us, for the small LGBT/feminist organization, it was a very hard thing to do, to be honest, because, that's the first time ever, like, LGBT and related organizations collected such amount of signatures under president petition. And we did it finally. But how? To be honest, it was very hard because we worked 24/7, writing people, different kind of people, bloggers, journalists, allies, not allies, different NGOs. We did a huge list of the different organizations who can be supported to this petition. And finally, it worked because even on the half of the way, we thought it will be failure. But it worked because many people made shares on the Facebook and Instagram and also different kind of other social networks. And they also wrote to their friends and peers asking them to do something. And several bloggers also went online talking about the need to ratify Istanbul Convention. So basically, I think that the solidarity and partnerships, it works well. But another question, of course, in our times of the informational races on different topics, how we can put the attention to our issues. Because from my side, I can say, like, yes, now we mobilize people for Istanbul Convention, but I'm not sure if, for instance, we will be able to mobilize the same amount of people under same-sex marriages, for instance. So the question is, what is our strategy? Maybe we need to start now from the women's rights and related topics, and then goes directly to LGBTQI. Maybe this is a good strategy.
Thank you very much, Olena. So basically, expand our networks and also start explaining in a bigger context what it means for everybody else as well. When people are proposing to limit our rights, like what's next, who's next, and what it actually means. Mamikon, maybe get back to you and share some of the strategies that you're thinking about from your perspective.
Sure. You know what is interesting? Whenever we choose some strategy, those anti-gender groups, they take the strategy and use them against us. So, the petitions, the court cases, and there are several feminists whose cases are in the court because they are arguing that these activists are spreading pornography on their organization's websites or wherever, if you talk about sexuality or similar things. That's why the strategies are working for some period, and then you have to change. What we did, recently we announced that August 3 is National Day for LGBT plus rights. Why August 3? Because 2 years ago there was a big hate crime case against activists and the police wants to close the case. The courts are still playing around. After 2 years, nobody is involved in the case. So we want to raise awareness, and we want to say that this is our day. We demand justice, and we will get it. Because those anti-gender groups, after the hate crime, they went to that village where it took place and celebrated the victory against perversion. So we want to say that this is our day. We will celebrate the victory against your aggressions, against your crimes. And this is like a first step. This year, we will have several online activities, but we want every year to make it bigger and bigger. And every year to remind that even if the court will not take the case, even if we lose it, or send it to European Court and wait 10 years, and what will happen after that. But we want every year to remind that this happened because of those groups, those movements. So awareness is a way that we choose, and all like visibility activities around that is kind of another type of pride celebration probably that we will have. Let's see how it works.
Thank you very much, Mamikon. You said a lot of important things, and obviously this court case, when it comes to accusing, feminists of spreading pornography, for whether it's, materials that include like proper information about gender or sexuality, or whether it's in Russia, the case of, body positive paintings and drawings. It also seems that, there's a toolbox coming from specific countries, for instance, Russia, and this toolbox is being used widely by different anti-gender groups, politicians, clergy, etc. So this is also something to look out for. Natia, maybe you tell us about what you are thinking in terms of resistance strategies, and what should we do?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, the strategies are really various and happens on the different level. Legislative, I should say that Georgia has a slightly better situation on the in regards of legislation. For example, we passed anti-discrimination law in 2014. We ratified Istanbul Convention in 2017, but implementation of these laws is, of course, another issue, and we monitor tightly how this goes. We see there's a big problem in the police, in the court, while investigating homophobic and transphobic crimes. There is a low level of trust among the community when they want to report a crime, and it is reflected in our yearly reports. We have actually also reported all our international partners, the EU and independent expert of SOGI, who was Madrigal Bordos, was in 2018 in Georgia. In his report, it's also mentioned that implementation of this anti-discrimination law is problematic. But we also try to actually, whenever it's possible, collaborate collaborate with the government, whether it's the training of police or whether it's training of various professional groups, because someone has to do this work, and actually this should be the government itself training the police or other level of this chain of the law enforcement, but it's actually not happening. So whenever it's possible, we try to do that. Another problem is that there is not much preventive mechanisms of the crime, whether it's a gender-based crime or whether it's a homophobic and transphobic crime. There is a lack of education on gender and sexuality, which is a big problem, and which is where all these gender-related crimes stem from. And there was years when there was initiative to implement relevant lessons in the school, but of course it was again opposed by the church, by the anti-gender movements. So I think in this regard we should push the government, whoever is in government, because usually the governments change, but they don't really strive to really implement these preventive mechanisms. Well, as for media, it's also very problematic because, again, all the governments try to really control the media, and now today we have the situation when all the big, especially TV media, where biggest number of the population gets the information, it's still TV, is controlled either by the government or the opposition parties, and there is not really independent media which serves the people, even when there are cases when media, this opposition media, tries to investigate the cases, it's usually it's usually directed to oppose the government, not to really thoroughly investigate cases. So lack of independent media and, of course, lack of independent court and justice is also a big problem because, again, all the governments in the history of independence of Georgia tried to control media, social media now as well, because in the last years we have also seen the Facebook revealed some as we call them troll factories. Which is fighting the government, which is crazy that Facebook or Twitter and other such kind of big social media corporations are to blame themselves in some way because they don't really tend to effectively oppose the anti-gender mobilization on social media. Last year, or sorry, the year before, we had the case when WISC's page was reported, probably by anti-gender movements, and it was really crazy because we had to contact Facebook to really tell them that we are not the ones who are violating their community standards, and this is really the mobilization of anti-gender movements. And we see there are lots of pages and groups on social media that that just pay for advertisement, and Facebook is not very effective, and other social medias also have the same problem. So I think it's really important to somehow also address this issue, and whenever we can, we should contact them as well. Yeah, so legislation, education, preventive mechanisms, I think this is the
Thank you. Thank you very much. You touched upon a lot of important things, but I think that the biggest takeaway here is that our struggle for equality is much broader. And I mean, it is part of the general struggle for, you know, higher level of democracy, higher functioning of the democratic institutions, freedom of expression, independent media. It is all interconnected, and I think that this is a very important thing that emancipatory movements, you know, civil movements need to understand that and start cooperating around it, because when something affects negatively one group in the society, it actually tends to affect negatively others. We are almost we are coming to the end of today's webinar. I don't think that we have questions at the moment, so I will use this last 2 minutes to summarize also what were the findings in terms of resistance strategies in the mapping that we did, because we also interviewed 27 activists from the Eastern Partnership countries in Russia, and we reviewed, you know, numerous articles and reports. A lot of the findings that we had there also resonate with what the three of you were saying. So among the resistance strategies, working towards ending the sense of impunity among the perpetrators of hate crimes, discrimination, and, you know, like whether or not they're representing any specific far-right or anti-gender groups. So ending impunity and have a proactive and preventive approach to bias-motivated crimes was one of the very important parts, because I think that when violence is understood as acceptable against certain groups in the society, that sort of seals the deal and makes the situation really, really hard. Intersectional strategies, which you also mentioned, you know, working with other movements and cooperation between LGBT movement and feminist and women's rights movements has come up on numerous occasions today as well. Learning more about recruitment tactics and funding schemes of these groups was also mentioned as an important point, and, you know, working together to counter the false narratives. Thank you very much for participating in today's webinar. Your input has been incredibly important, and we will continue to work together. We will continue to discuss these issues, and so long. Happy Pride, everyone. Stay safe, and I'll catch you some other time.
Happy Pride.